Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back at not our regularly scheduled programming time. I know I forgot. I was just telling John. I forgot to mention that we were going to be going earlier because John has a Canadian holiday today, so we're doing it in the middle of the day, getting it done. And if you follow us on social media, on Instagram or on Twitter or anything, you just saw the Survivor Specialist put out that we're going to start at 8:15, which did not happen. It's starting now. And we're talking Iron Man 2 and we're talking Haunted Mansion, a little matinee for all of you, because both of these movies are very much matinee movies. Neither one of these deserve to be prime time. So it's a good duo to not do at 8 p.m. Like we usually do. And so we're going to be talking a lot about Disney here today. Disney's recent box office flops, of which Haunted Mansion was one. We ended up choosing to do Haunted Mansion instead of Meg 2 or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even though Meg 2 actually beat Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles at the box office, even though Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is getting very good reviews and people are really loving it. But we decided to do Haunted Mansion because we really want to talk about like what's happening with these Disney movies right now between Pixar and their animated movies and their live action remakes. They have not had a good box office summer at all. Indiana Jones 4.
Five. It's the fifth one.
Sorry, my bad. I forget that the fourth one is so bad. I never finished it. It's so bad. One of the few movies I turn off. But yeah, so we're gonna be talking about Iron Man 2 and Haunted Mansion. And John, welcome back. It's our third episode. If you haven't checked out Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 1, you're not missing anything with the Incredible Hulk. That's for sure.
No, at least Iron Man 2 is better than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Iron Man 2 gets a lot of hate, and as somebody who's going to really destroy these Marvel movies further down the line, I didn't hate this movie. I really didn't hate it. So I just need to let that be known that this didn't bother me as much as I thought it was going to, and maybe it's because it's so universally panned, not to the level of the Hulk, but I found myself sitting here going, yeah, whatever. It was a movie. It happened.
I think Iron Man 2 is this really interesting point in the MCU where we're still really early. They're clearly building up to something here. We get a lot of that in this movie. We get a lot of introductions of new characters who are going to be staples in the MCU. We have nods to other characters, a lot of setup for what's coming next. And at the same time, for me, my issue with Iron Man 2 is it feels like we get a little bit of a lot of things rather than a lot of a few things.
Mm-hmm.
And while yes, it's much more enjoyable than The Incredible Hulk, it still kind of falls a little flat for me because it feels like there's almost too much going on.
Yeah, I feel like they were so into the whole political conspiracy, bring in Vanko, whatever, blah, 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 go right down the line and put it in this real world setting. I praised Iron Man 1 for having that real world setting stuff, which Incredible Hulk really struggled with. It does feel like they're trying to force too many things in and give too many characters too much to do. And with the introduction of Black Widow, Jon Favreau trying to make himself at least a C-list actor in this movie and keep himself relevant. That's very apparent throughout the movie. The Pepper Potts storyline is what it is. Don Cheadle. I don't think Don Cheadle's as good as Terrence Howard. And I like Don Cheadle more as an actor overall, but I think Terrence Howard fits that role better. Mickey Rourke nearly as good of a villain as Jeff Bridges is. And it's not the acting there. It's just the character in general. And they're trying to mosh it all together. But I actually found I was entertained enough until pretty much the scene where he figures out that his dad was hiding the new element in plain sight or something like that, or whatever he figures out in that scene. That was a horrible scene. And from there on, I'm just okay, this is just redundant BS. And that really frustrated me.
It's so interesting that you say that's a horrible scene because I think it's my favorite sequence of the entire movie is when he figures this out because it really harkens back to a lot of Iron Man 1 and what I really enjoyed about Iron Man 1 with the scientific discovery and the experimentation, things like that. And it really felt like that again. And we get 5 minutes of it in this movie. I'm yeah, this is what I want out of Iron Man. I want to see Tony Stark as this genius. And the problem is, I think why it doesn't hit hard enough is because we don't see his fall quite be enough of a fall, in my opinion. Now, I know you're not versed with the comics and everything like that. But what we're seeing here is an adaptation of essentially the pinnacle of Iron Man stories in Demon in a Bottle, which is an 8-issue run from 79, which deals with Tony Stark's alcoholism.
Mm.
And it's hinted at a lot. It kind of gets to like the party scene, which is kind of like Favreau's gone on record saying this is as much of this storyline as we want to do. Obviously, it's a contentious storyline to be doing with someone like Robert Downey Jr. in that role anyways.
Of course, yeah.
But it is really considered the best Iron Man story ever written. And to see it kind of like hinted at here, it just feels like we don't get like the low lows that a story about alcoholism should have. And it kind of feels like we're hinting at alcoholism, but we're just too afraid to actually say it in this movie that we want families to go to.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I guess that doesn't bother me so much because I know that these movies are going to have kid gloves on the entire time. I mean, that's just what Marvel movies are. That's what superhero movies in general are. When they're not, like, honestly, DC tries to get a lot darker with these, which I respect, even though a lot of their movies are absolute garbage. But after the atrocity that was Batman and Robin, they tried to get much darker with their movies. And you see that with like the Dark Knight and like the physical demands that the whole thing takes on Bruce Wayne. And you see that with what they did with the new Batman with Robert Pattinson. I mean, they try to be darker, and Batman's an easy one to be dark with, but it seems like they tried to go that route a little bit more, where Marvel is like the glossy version, right? And that's where I always kind of laugh, because when people talk about like these characters and, oh, what a crazy thing, like, how did they overcome that? It's like, because it's a Marvel movie and like they're not going through the pits of hell like Shame or like The Wrestler, which I'm not saying they should, but also like if you want to do a realistic depiction of alcoholism, you know, pretty much leaving Las Vegas is what you have to do. And you're not going to do that in a Marvel movie. So I'm okay with that. What I hate, and one of my least favorite movies of all time, is Hidden Figures. I hate that movie. I think it's so bad. And the reason why I hate that movie is because every time the women in that movie do something, it's a montage with upbeat music of them writing on a chalkboard, and then Kevin Costner going, "Oh my God, that's right. Oh my, that's right." And I'm like, okay, but what's right? What did they do? What did they learn? What did these characters overcome? Why are they so brilliant? Like, what's going on? Why are we doing such a BS version of this? Like in Oppenheimer, I didn't feel like we got that of like, whoa, you're doing this. I felt like he was like figuring it out, and we understood like the brilliance of Oppenheimer and what he was trying to do and accomplish and whatever. And I feel like there was some learning going on there. What pissed me off about this scene, and since it is so pinnacle, it's like the turning point of the movie, is I felt like it was very much like Tony Stark being like, "Oh my God, I figured it out." And it's like, okay, cool. What did you figure? Like, I don't, why did you figure that out? How did you figure that out? I don't understand how you put these pieces together. You're leaving too much to the imagination for me here, especially since after that moment, it's like, oh, now he's strong. And then it's just total. It's what I hate about superhero movies for the final 25 minutes.
Yeah, and I mean that is another thing that I think is, again, this just leads on to like too many storylines I found in this film. We're dealing with this idea that, yes, we have like the hinted alcoholism of Tony, and we also have this storyline running that he has to use palladium in order to like power his arc reactor, and by doing that, he's poisoning himself. And it's like, it's there, but it never seems to be that big of an issue in the movie.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's never addressed as like, this is the issue. Whereas I think if this film really centered on that storyline, it reinforces every other storyline in this movie, right? It's like, hey, this is happening, and like this is explaining Tony's erratic behavior, right? Like, you can actually like completely ditch the alcoholism at that point, or you can embrace the alcoholism at that point as a response to the fact that Tony's dying, right? And then build on it from there. But what we need to see then is Tony experimenting with other elements in order to see if he can do this. And then that makes the discovery of the element at the end of the, or at the climax of this film, such a more pivotal moment. And the fact that like, it's also the fact that like, it doesn't spend enough time. We don't see anything of Tony and Howard's relationship as father and son. And we haven't, because, you know, Howard's dead. But because we're not seeing it, I'm not a big flashback guy in movies, but I think we needed them in this movie, because we need to establish the fact that Tony believes his dad hated him. And then we get an emotional impact when Howard says, "You're the greatest thing I've ever created."
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem the biggest downside of this movie, aside from fighting robots at the end, which, oh my God, we'll talk about that. There's nothing worse
Yes,
in
we
film
will.
history than when superheroes fight robots that literally aren't people and aren't characters. It's awful. But there is no emotional payoff to, I feel like, any of the stories. When Pepper Potts does her little, you were really dying, like, I felt nothing for her. Like, I felt nothing. Like, there's nothing there. And that's, there's a way to make that meaningful and powerful and whatever. I felt nothing. I was like, oh, is Gwyneth Paltrow sure she won an Oscar? Like, are we sure with how she's acting in that scene? Like, and that was frustrating. And I don't feel like it was earned when John Slattery is saying, you're too young to understand this now, but I'm going to do this, whatever. But it's not earned. Like, it's so unearned. And again, this is all happening in the final half hour of this movie. And that was like the first hour and a half. I thought this movie was fine. I thought Sam Rockwell was a fun little villain. I thought the Mickey Rourke stuff was interesting as that type of villain can be. But then once it started to get to these like payoffs, I felt like there was no payoff to really anything. And I'm curious if that's how I'm going to feel as I move forward, because I don't know, like to me, like you gotta earn that a little bit more. And I want to treat the Marvel movies the same way I treat any other movie other than the Planet of the Apes franchise, as I learned this week, because I've been rewatching all of them. And I'll give all of them 2.5, 3 stars, even if I don't think they're that good, because I love them and they're my childhood and whatever, except for the Tim Burton piece of shit, which is the worst movie I've ever seen. But I want to treat the Iron Man and like the other Marvel movies like regular movies, right? Sit down and like hold them to the same standard. And I get you have to know what you're coming into. Like, what's your expectation? This is going to be an action movie. It's going to be fun, whatever. And it was that until the final half hour. And that's why I gave it 2.5 stars at the end of the day out of 4. I know Letterboxd makes us do out of 5, but we rate on the 4 system because that's what like 99.9% of people in film do. So I gave it 2.5 out of 4 because I felt like the first part of the movie was a perfectly fine 3-star, exciting Marvel movie. And then the last half hour was a 1.5 to 2-star movie. And you equal it out. And I'm like, it's like more 2.5 than 2, but the payoffs just weren't there. And I need the payoffs to be there in these movies as we move forward, because I don't know, like I can't just shrug my shoulders and be like, oh, okay, like your dad said you're the best thing to ever happen to him. It's like, that's total BS. There's no way Howard Stark actually believes any of that based on anything we've seen about him.
Yeah, I mean, that's the issue, right? And we kind of had this conversation when we were talking about the Incredible Hulk last week, where they made it to be an action movie, but Iron Man is more of a drama with action scenes. And the first like hour and a half of this movie is that. Again, it's like we get like the, like we get the Monaco chase scene or like race scene and conflict there, right? But it's not like this big, massive action set piece. And it didn't need a big action set piece. The first Iron Man, the final battle is what, like 10 minutes of that movie? Tops.
Yeah.
But in this one, we have like a half hour robots fighting Iron Man, like undiscernible people going through. Is this supposed to be funny? There are some scenes where it's like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be laughing or not right now in that last half hour, where it's like when the one that really stuck out to me was Tony flies past that parking lot of cars and like a couple of car alarms start going off. And then all the robots fly over them and all the car alarms start going off. Is that supposed to be funny?
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, I don't understand the purpose of that.
Yeah.
And that's where I found myself struggling with this movie, is like, okay, but what's the greater purpose of this? Sometimes it's set up for future things. And that is something we're going to be discussing in every Marvel movie to come from here. Because we're at a point where it's very clear these movies are going to be successful so they can set up things for the future. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But there are other parts of this movie where it's like, Jon Favreau, what are you doing?
Yeah. No, I do agree with that. The Monaco scene, I actually think that might be the worst acting of Robert Downey Jr.'s career. The thing with the door, where he keeps opening and shutting the door and Whiplash cuts it in half and then he keeps doing it. Robert Downey Jr., if you watch that scene, like, I was like, what is he doing? I couldn't figure out, like, it was almost like he didn't know what to look at or what emotion to be expressing. There's no fear. There's no concern. It seems like he's still trying to be like the arrogant playboy, but at the same time, he's not, and it's not working. Yeah. And that whole thing is like taken way too lightly. And Whiplash is just getting constantly hit with the car. And I'm like, why doesn't that actually hurt him more? I don't understand, because like I know he has the arc reactor in him, but he is very much like has that on his upper body. Like, couldn't he still become paralyzed? Like, I don't get it. And it just seemed like it was such like a light scene for what actually is like the biggest moment of the movie. Like that to me is the best action. It's supposed to be the best action sequence of the movie. And I feel like it like really fell flat. So yeah, I didn't get that scene like that much. I thought, it's cool when Mickey Rourke's walking like Jason and super slow, or Mike Myers and just like, ha ha ha, here I come. But like, I just felt like it was taken too lightly when two characters that aren't Iron Man are the ones in danger. Like, why is he taking it so lightly that like Pepper and Happy could both just die right there and it'd kind of be his fault? Like, I don't understand why that's giggle time.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, we talked about it in the first Iron Man. One of the greatest scenes in that movie is the plane chase where the plane gets the wing clipped and the pilot's going down and Tony stops, risks his life to save the guy because it's the hero moment, right? And now we have two people who are actually like personally connected to Tony and he doesn't seem to care.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's a stark contrast to the character. I mean, no pun intended. But it's a stark contrast to like what the character we've seen previously, right? Like he has this cold playboy exterior, but we know deep down he wants to help people. That's the whole point of his character. And two of the people who mean the most to him in his entire life are in immediate danger. And he's kind of just joking around.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like a defense mechanism either.
Yeah, it almost feels like Spider-Man 3. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man 3, where it's like you've just totally butchered the Peter Parker character. And again, I found that to be a little bit more forgivable in this because it is such a short moment. And then after that, he does like turn back on the seriousness and everything like that. But it really did not make sense to me how that went down at the Monaco scene. I was very, very confused. But ultimately, why this movie is not as good as the first one and why it's definitely closer to 2 than 3 in when I give it 2.5, right? But I give it 2.5 and like, that's my feeling. Cause I feel like I'm going to be ripping so many of these movies. I'm trying to like preemptively be nice, but what ultimately killed me with this movie was the final 30. And I'm talking like the action sequence where Rhodes comes up and he's the Iron Man, War Machine, whatever. And then you have Sam Rockwell doing his little speech and Whiplash has, gotten in and he's controlling all of them. And we then have 20 minutes of Tony Stark and explosions and him shooting robots. There is nothing less interesting in the world than a main character who is not going to die because of what is the stupidest phrase in the history of time, but plot armor. Because of plot armor, he can't die. And he is shooting against not people. And yeah, you have the moment of like him going with Don Cheadle, and then that's solved very easily because all they do is reboot his thing, and now he's good, and that's quick and easy. And then Tony kills all the robots with his little laser thing, and then Whiplash shows up. And I'm not saying that these new movies need to have these massive, massive final battles, but the Whiplash fight scene, I think, is less than 2 minutes long. After we just watched about 20 minutes of him and the robots. Why? Like, so Whiplash is a pointless villain. There was no reason for it. And part of me almost wonders, why did they make Iron Man 2 before Thor and before Captain America? Was it just because of the success of Iron Man 1? And if that was the case, it really shows at the end of this movie, because it felt like there was nothing from a developmental standpoint that made Iron Man 2 a necessary movie for the Iron Man franchise or for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's nothing that happens at the end of this movie other than Thor's hammer, which is the post-credit scene, that makes this necessary. We didn't need to watch Tony Stark go through this in this moment. Whiplash is a totally pointless villain because everything cool about him that happens early on is totally thrown away because he's so at the end, and he's essentially just Jeff Bridges but weaker. And they just blow him up. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, we know that him and Rhodes are good. Like we saw at the end of the first one. I don't know why this movie, it really leaves you questioning, like, why did this happen? Why did this exist? Why did we watch this? And John was saying beforehand, he's like, we're going to talk about a movie that a Marvel movie that I enjoyed more than you, and I think I'm just more lenient with my ratings. I don't even think it's necessarily that you enjoyed it more, because I have plenty of faults with this movie, and the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, did I enjoy it as much as I thought I enjoyed it? Which wasn't that much, but maybe I didn't even enjoy it that much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm usually more lenient on movies than you are, but maybe this is the instance where you are more lenient than I. It's just, I feel like this has a problem that a lot of superhero movies have had in the past, and that is the too many villain problem.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't get that in Iron Man 1 because we only had the one villain. We had the like proxy villain in, the terrorists. But the real villain was Jeff Bridges' character, right? Obadiah Stane. And then even in Incredible Hulk, right? You had the main villain of Thunderbolt Ross. And then you brought in Tim Roth's Abomination at the very end as like something to match the Hulk so you could have a final battle. In this one, where once again, this is the third Marvel movie in a row where the villain at the end of the movie is just the bad guy has the good guy's powers.
Yep.
It's the third movie in a row. And it is something that happens a lot in the MCU. And in this case, like there's such a personal connection between Vanko and Stark, but they don't really know it and they don't elaborate on it at all. Right? Whiplash as a character looks so much cooler in the Monaco scene than he does at the end of this movie.
Yeah.
He design-wise, he looks better. And I get the idea, like, suiting up so that you can go toe-to-toe with Iron Man and everything. But, like, it takes away all the character in this character. Like, he doesn't feel like another character, especially when we just saw Iron Man fight a bunch of faceless robots the entire time, and you look like a faceless robot now. Like, it doesn't feel like we're getting anything out of this. 100%. And then you have Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer as a character there, who feels like he should be more villainous, but they kind of play him off as this like bumbling idiot in this movie.
Yeah, and I actually thought like he was kind of like the fun side villain.
Yeah.
But then he really disappears and really isn't.
Like he's not involved in the villainy at all, right?
He's not exactly. He's not really involved in like why everybody's failing. Like he wants to show up Tony Stark, but what politician isn't trying to show up whoever? I mean, look at like Elon Musk, who's in this movie. How many politicians are trying to show up Elon Musk right now because it'll be good for their base? Like it'll be good for their votes at the end of the day. So I don't find him to be villainous for this. I find him to be a politician. He's not the one who's saying, "Oh, let's kill everybody." Like that's 100% Whiplash. So Sam Rockwell's character, it just feels like it's petty the entire time. And I guess that's okay.
Where I feel like this would be much more impactful if like he's not like, I think he needed a tinge of villainy to him, even if it is like from the standpoint of like creating this weapon system for the American government. Like it's a comic villain, right? Like as much as I hate saying this, sometimes comic villains seem to be a little over the top.
Yeah.
Right. And like Whiplash kind of feels like over the top in a bad way at times in this movie, where it's like really emphasizing the Russian aspect, really emphasizing the like personal vendetta, but like not digging into it. And it's like a little cartoony because of it. I think Justin Hammer's villainy had to be more cartoony, and it had to be more actual villainy and not just like I'm an competitor of Stark Industries and I want the government contract. But like it's not like he's willing to do anything to get the contract, right? Yes, he's willing to break a convict out of prison and everything, but like it's not like he is willing to put people in danger and stuff like that. Like that's not what he's trying to do. And at that point, it's just like, okay, you're just like some side character in this movie. You're not even a villain.
He doesn't feel like he wants to take over the world, right? Which is like what the villains are always supposed to want to do. And then that's how I felt with Vanko too, where with Vanko, I'm like, okay, what is Vanko? Like he's blaming Tony Stark for the like Howard Stark causing his family to just like suffer for so long. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but there has to be a bigger reason for wanting to go after Tony Stark so viciously, I felt.
It's not even that. I think it's just like Vanko never explains that to Tony. We don't get a villain monologue from him.
No, we don't. I know. How can we have a movie like this without a villain monologue?
There's no villain monologue to be like, I blame you for what your father did, leading to the realization of what Howard did to Vanko's father, right? Like, there's just like these core elements to a movie like this that seem to be missing from this one.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, like maybe I was too lenient on it, but I did feel like the first hour I was fine. Like the first hour I was fine, with the exception of that one little thing in Monaco, which isn't really a little thing because it's big with character development. But like this was never going to be a 4-star movie. Like I knew that.
Yeah.
But then as it was going on and on and on, and I'm like, okay, like what are the payoffs to this? And I feel like when they elect to have Sam Rockwell, there is no big final moment with Sam Rockwell either.
No, like, he just gets arrested.
Yeah, like who cares? He gets arrested and that's it. Like I wanted to see more with him.
Yeah.
We get the Senator Stern part, which is fine, I guess, because clearly, you know, like that was like a cartoony version of like the corruption of politics, which like I'm fine with. Like it's Marvel again, that's fine. But yeah, Sam Rockwell's character has no payoff. Mickey Rourke's villain just peters out. I mean, puff over the finish line. And we get more with the robots. And it's like, okay, like that falls flat. Okay, that's done. Moving on.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's just like, again, like this, like these robot army and stuff is like very similar to that Demon in a Bottle storyline that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. And it's just like it falls flat. And this is a storyline that should never fall flat because it's already written.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like you're coming up with original content. You don't have to come up with original content, but you did, and it didn't come out that well. And then you also have like, I get the introduction of Black Widow. I get why you're doing that. I don't think anyone ever thought Black Widow would become a major character in the MCU like she did after this point. I do like Scarlett Johansson in the casting for the role. I do like what she provides in a lot of these movies. Why is this person from Legal just hanging out all the time? Why is no one questioning it?
And what bothered me even more is like, so she's Russian, right? Like that's the whole point. Natasha Romanoff, right? Like she is Russian.
Well, she's a Russian spy.
Okay, she's a Russian spy. Whiplash is Russian. Why is there no connection between those two characters? Why
that's a good point.
Why is there nothing where S.H.I.E.L.D. was like, we're implementing you now so that you can help Tony take down the Russian bad guy, the Russian supervillain? Why is that not done? Because that would be so clear cut. That'd be clean. And I get S.H.I.E.L.D. introducing her, blah, 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 like whatever. But why does the Russian thing never come into play, considering, if I'm not mistaken, from the trailer I watched for Black Widow, her whole personality is that she's Russian. So why does that not come into play?
Oh, because, well, I mean, if I'm being honest, it's because they've never actually written Black Widow well in any of these movies.
Yeah.
And a lot of like Black Widow being a good character in the MCU is strictly off Scarlett Johansson's performance, in my opinion. But they never really delve deep into her character. So I don't think they ever intended to, right? Like, again, it's one of these things where the MCU at this point, like the Marvel Studios, is taking characters who are like pretty obscure, but not like terribly obscure, like enough name recognition that you know who they are, but like not enough that you'll care if they mess up their storylines, and introducing them into the MCU.
Yeah. Yep. They didn't know. It became bigger than they thought it could even become. And, you know, Scarlett Johansson was a big get. I mean, Scarlett Johansson was a name by this point for sure. But
there's almost like a small reference to Lost in Translation that, like, if you really dig deep into it, about the modeling in Japan thing.
Yeah, I did see that. That made me laugh.
Yeah, and like that's the type of humor that I expect from Jon Favreau, right?
Yeah.
Like those little type of things. That was funny. But like, again, no payoffs whatsoever. And like, I get the whole point of this storyline is to be like, we want Iron Man and the Avengers, but we don't want Tony Stark. And it's going to be huge for like Tony Stark's character moving forward and everything. But at the same time, it's like, did you really need to have like an entire separate storyline here?
Yeah.
In order to do that? Couldn't you just be like, hey, we watched you and this is what we thought?
Yeah. Throw it in at the beginning of the Avengers and make it a 5-minute scene.
Yeah.
You know, like that's all it had to be. So no, I mean, this, to me, this movie was like fine, like a 2.5-star movie to me. Like A 3.5, or 4-star movie are movies that like I consider to be good. A 2.5-star movie is a movie that I consider to be fine. There's parts of it I like. There's parts of it I don't like. I don't feel badly. Like I don't dislike it enough. It didn't feel like a waste of my time to give it 2 or 1.5 or whatever. But yeah, it has some serious flaws. And another thing, and like I know some people think this stuff is funny, but I just can't stand it. The scene where they're at the diner and they're all dressed as their characters, that to me is just like, all right, like just throw every cheese ball at the window and just keep throwing them until it's as cheesy as humanly possible. It's just, I don't know. Like, I just don't get, like, because also we see that scene, and then later on we have Jon Favreau say to her, "What are you wearing?" And that part is funny, but it would be a lot funnier if we hadn't already seen her dressed like this in a diner where nobody thinks to question it.
Yeah, also, better reveal if we don't find out about who she is until the Jon Favreau scene.
Because there was no reason to have it at that point, because he could have realized like there's nothing really that happens before that makes it necessary for him to know then. I know we have the pepper pot scene where he's like, "Do you say anything serious?" But there was no reason for it. There's just no reason.
Yeah, it's just it felt like this one was rushed, and I can't remember what year did this one come out.
2010. So it was rushed. It was only 2 years after the first Iron Man.
Right. So it was Iron Man was super successful. They're like, okay, we have to make this sequel. And it's rushed at this point, right? They realize how much of a success they're having. And because of that, it feels like this movie could have used like 3 or 4 more script revisions, and then it could have been really good.
Yeah.
But it just misses the mark. Now, it's not the worst Marvel movie by any means. So we already watched The Incredible Hulk, so obviously it's not the worst. And it's just not the best. And it's one that I think a lot of people remember really well, because this is the one that I think brought a lot of people into the MCU, because this is the point where you realized it was a thing.
Yeah, this was when people started watching, because the first Iron Man, if you missed it in theaters, you had rented it from Blockbuster or whatever your video store was, and you had gone and watched it. And if you missed The Incredible Hulk, it didn't matter because you were going to go watch Iron Man 2. And so, I do agree with you on that. And it has so many people that I love, like, attached to it, like Justin Theroux, screenplay. I really like Jon Favreau, like Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, John Slattery from Mad Men. I mean, these are people, like, if you go up and down my top 100 movies or like my top 10 TV shows, they're all over it. And yet, at the end of the day,
it's fine. It's fine. It's not the worst. This is one that you had already seen, though, correct?
I had seen this. So I have seen everything up through the Avengers. I have seen Thor. I have seen Captain America, which I do think is helping because I kind of know what to expect as I come into all of these movies. The only one I hadn't seen from phase 1 was The Incredible Hulk. And I'm very glad that was only the first time I watched it, because I couldn't have done it a second time. All right.
Now, before we move on, there is one thing I do want to talk about, because there's been one retcon to the MCU from this movie.
I'm listening. I don't have anything to say to that.
You know the scene where there's the kid and the robot is about to shoot the kid in the face?
Yeah, that's definitely going to be Spider-Man, right?
It is Spider-Man. They have retconned it so that is Spider-Man. It is officially, that is Peter Parker.
And what makes me laugh is, even in that moment, having not seen anything, not knowing anything about the other movies, I was like, that's definitely Peter Parker. There's no way they don't have that be Peter Parker.
Yeah. So after they introduced the Spider-Man character into everything, it became Peter Parker.
Yeah, I figured.
Beforehand, it was just random child who was about to get his head blown off.
Yeah. No, I had a feeling that would be like a Peter Parker thing moving forward. Yeah. So
it's not explicitly mentioned in any film, but it is technically canon.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Now I know. Can I move on now? Can I stop talking about Iron Man?
Yes, let's move on.
Let's move on, and I am so excited. I have been pumped for this. I really fought to have Haunted Mansion, because as somebody who loves Disney, I'm going to Disney World in less than 2 weeks with my family. I love Disney World. I'm an annual pass holder. I love all the animated movies. Right now, I'm currently going through the animated movies in order of release. Thank God I got through the war era movies, and I'm finally on to like regular movies. I love Disney. I think Disney has done some of the greatest stuff ever. And now we get to talk about how Disney has 1000% ruined their brand with the nonsense they have been putting out. And the Haunted Mansion is the latest in a string of financial disasters for them. This movie had a budget of $157 million. That's not counting P&A. That is just from the production budget. Worldwide, it has currently made $59 million. We're talking by the time all is said and done, this has been out for 2 weeks. When all is said and done, this might not break $100 million worldwide. The Eddie Murphy movie made $180 million worldwide. And John and I both went and saw it. I was going to see this anyway, and I'm very happy I made John watch it. But it's just boring. Like, it's just boring. And I am excited to talk about this movie and also talk about, like, how is Disney going to save itself from this boring stuff they've been putting out? Everything they put out, it's not must-watch film, must-watch TV the way it used to be.
No, it's not. And I think there are some caveats to take into consideration here. The Eddie Murphy Haunted Mansion, don't forget, was coming off the success of Pirates of the Caribbean. So it did get a bigger pull because of that. And this movie is coming off of a bunch of failures. Like, that's just what it comes down to. We're in an era where no one's excited about Disney movies anymore. Now, I didn't know this movie was even coming out until about, mid-June, I think? I think I saw a trailer for it before I saw Asteroid City. And then that was the point where I was like, okay, like, this movie looks like it could be funny. You see this great cast, this great comedic cast. You have Lakeith Stanfield, you have Owen Wilson, Tiffany Haddish,
Danny DeVito,
Rosario
Dawson, who's not really a comedic actress, but still great.
I mean,
Jamie
Clerks.
Lee Curtis. Yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis, fresh off an Oscar.
Yeah, right? Like, this cast is... I mean, Jared Leto's there, I guess. I guess we should probably mention him, who is, like, a good actor. Kind of weird, but good actor. Like, it's a cast that should not only be able to deliver a massive hit family comedy, but should also just give great performances all around, right? It's you would expect something good out of these people. Every single one of them did not care about this movie.
No, you could tell. They were like, we're getting our paycheck and we're getting the hell out of here. What's very funny about this, I felt like they had such a strong start with the backstory of him, and now he's a ghost tour guy, because remember in the original Haunted Mansion movie, he's trying to sell real estate. That's what the whole movie is. And they go into this house because he wants to sell it. And this one started off like it was going to have like that kind of ghost story feel to it of like, there are no ghosts, but now he's stuck. And then the story just devolves into nothing. There is nothing there. And when you're telling people that the Eddie Murphy storyline is a better storyline, that's a problem. And you had 20 years to make a better storyline. And for such an iconic attraction, I mean, Haunted Mansion, I would argue, is one of the top 3 most iconic attractions at Disney World, in Disneyland, whatever. It's one of the top 3 most iconic attractions. You look like you had something to say to that.
I'm just now very curious what your top 3 attractions are.
Well, I'm just saying in terms of iconic, I would say you're probably looking at this, Pirates of the Caribbean, and either Dumbo or It's a Small World or Jungle Cruise. Like I would say that those are like your top 5. And then you get into the mountains and all of that. But those are your like top 5, because anybody can do them at any age. And you have like little kids going on them with their grandparents being like, this is what we're going to do. And for something so iconic and something that has so much thought and detail put into it, if you ever get a chance, on Disney Plus, they have a show called Behind the Attraction. The one on the Haunted Mansion is fascinating. It is fascinating because they talk about how they wanted to make it scary, but they needed to remember that this was supposed to be a family-oriented park. So how do they make it fun? And it's fascinating to hear how they did that. I wish they would put that same amount of attention and thought into making the movie, because it's like, what were they going for? Like, that's what I couldn't figure out. And John and I read the Letterboxd review, and I probably have to give it credit because, I am bringing it up on a podcast. So just bear with me for one very quick second, but it comes from Silent Dawn. But they say in it, this movie was so bad that there's a part where Lakeith Stanfield is talking about his dead wife and how much it hurt him, and he name drops Baskin Robbins so that Disney can get their product placement in.
Yeah.
What the hell are they doing?
And there's no other Baskin Robbins in the entire movie, so it makes no sense.
I know. He says Baskin Robbins because Baskin Robbins probably had a audio, not visual deal in this movie, and it needed to be said at least once in the movie to get paid. And Disney got
Baskin Robbins comes up in a lot of Disney movies now that I think about it. It's come up in some of the Marvel movies too. So there must be some deal going on.
Yeah, there must be something. But it's like you're throwing that in that scene where it's
it's the heavy scene.
It is
the heavy emotional scene of the entire movie. It's the emotional pinnacle of the movie. And we're talking about how his dead wife's favorite number is 31 because that's how many flavors Baskin Robbins had.
It's just so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. And like I felt bad for the Keith Stanfield because I talked about this on previous podcasts. Disney's going to try to turn around and blame it on Lakeith Stanfield or blame it on the actor strike or blame it on that, right? Like they're going to blame it on everybody but themselves. It's Disney's fault. Yeah. And this is where I always find it interesting. And I have to look up who the writer of this movie is. But what Disney started to do a lot, right? When people started to speak out more for equality in terms of more directing opportunities, writing opportunities for women, people of color, all of that. Disney started to give those opportunities, but they would give it on a project like Haunted Mansion, right? Yeah. And then what ends up happening is a movie like Haunted Mansion fails, and they point at that person and say, "Oh, well, it was because nobody knew who they were, and that's why it failed." And that always frustrates me because they look for their scapegoats before they even make the movie, and I don't think people realize that Disney is looking for their scapegoats before they even make these movies because right now they're in a really big cold spell. And I know Justin Simien directed it, and Justin Simien had done Dear White People. This is a big jump, though, from Dear White People to Bad Hair to Haunted Mansion. And Bad Hair, I didn't even know came out. This is a big jump. It's a really big jump. And now Justin Simien probably not getting any major studio having him direct a movie anytime any soon because this movie was just a disaster. And that's where, so now Justin Simien's career takes a bit of a dive. But was it his fault that this movie wasn't good?
No, I don't think so. What it comes down to is like no one cared about this movie. Like no one higher up in the company cared about this movie. And you know how you can tell? Because there was no promotional material for this movie at all. This felt like a movie that was made for Disney Plus that they decided to launch in theaters because they were having such a terrible time making money this year.
Yeah. Yeah. It did. It felt like a Disney Plus movie, for sure. And Katie Dippold wrote the script, and Katie Dippold had done The Heat back in 2013, and then did the Ghostbusters remake, which did not do very well, and now has done Haunted Mansion. But it did feel like a Disney Plus movie. But why? Also, here's my biggest question for this, and again, where it's like, who's making the decisions at Disney? You put this movie out in August. 1 week after the two biggest movies of the year came out that weren't your brand, right? Because Disney owns the Marvel and the Indiana Jones and all that. So that weren't under your umbrella. The two biggest movies of the year come out, and you put it out a week after that, and not in October when
it doesn't make
nothing else.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, especially when you consider the fact that there was a writer's strike announced 2 months before this movie came out.
Yeah,
and you know what? A bunch of studios did at that point. Pushed back releases because they had to. They hadn't because they either had to or they had an excuse to. And by that point, Disney should have known, okay, Barbie and Oppenheimer are tracking to be the biggest releases of the entire year. And this is back in May. Everyone knew that. People have been talking about Barbie and Oppenheimer for over a year at this point.
Yep.
And they still decided to release this movie a week later, instead of pushing it back to October, which should have been its original release date in the first place.
Yeah. Yep. It doesn't make any sense. And I get they're probably trying to avoid putting it up against other Disney movies. You don't want to be competing against yourself. So I get that. But you have now, it's almost like Disney knows that the product they're putting out isn't good. And they're almost trying to hide it. It's the same thing with Strange World, right? Strange World, the Disney animated movie that came out however many months ago now at this point.
It was last year, wasn't it?
Was it last year already?
I think so.
Strange World came out in 2022. There you go.
Yeah.
That was a movie that came out after Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, and they didn't put it straight to Disney Plus, but it was definitely a Disney Plus movie. They didn't promote it at all. The story, from what I've heard, I haven't seen it, was convoluted and like all over the place, and they were just trying to hit on so many political talking points. Essentially, like I think the whole point of the movie is like that it's like the world is falling apart because of like climate change or something.
I did actually see the movie, and it was that it was like a climate change type thing and like interacting with the world and stuff. But in the end, it felt like every other Disney movie that's come out in the last decade, where except instead of it's a daughter with issues with her mom, it's a son with issues with his dad.
Yeah. So there you go. And like, so I didn't see it, but it was a box office disaster. And it was like, but they didn't try to promote it at all. So part of me wonders, how much did they hide it? And how much with Haunted Mansion, with all these actors and everything on it? Yeah, they got to try to make some money back. But did they just think like, well, we got to put all our eggs in the Wish basket now because Wish is their new animated movie that's coming out in November? Are they thinking like that has to be our blockbuster now? And we don't want to move Haunted Mansion back into mid-October and then have it have a 4-week run and go right up into Wish. We don't want anything overlapping. I don't know. But I do know right now that Disney hasn't made, and I haven't seen a lot of the stuff that has come out, but Disney has not made a universally praised movie that's not Marvel. And really the only one they've made was Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Since I think you have to go all the way back to, and this is crazy because I have to keep going.
2016, 2017?
Probably since, I mean, Raya and the Last Dragon got good reviews and Encanto got good reviews, but probably since, oh my God, this is hard.
Like Moana's Zootopia, right?
Moana's Zootopia, Frozen 2 in 2019.
Sure.
I'd say Frozen 2.
I don't even know if Frozen 2 was that big, was it?
I don't know. I feel like it was because Frozen's very popular, but maybe I'm wrong. But like Soul is a Pixar movie, so that's different. Raya and the Last Dragon, that was coming out right after COVID, so it didn't have a huge box office because it was theatrical and Disney Plus. Encanto was theatrical. I think that movie is so bad. But
was Encanto theatrical? I thought it was. Weren't they also at the point here? And I mean, Bob Iger's gone on record lately. Bob Iger's been under a lot of spotlight lately.
Yeah,
obviously with like, his comments about actors and everything, and we're not a big fan of Bob Iger at the moment. Never was, because he made David Lynch reveal the killer of Laura Palmer.
But that's the only reason we did this podcast, was so John could say that publicly, because it's been driving him nuts.
But Bob Iger has said like simultaneous release with Disney Plus was a mistake. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it was a mistake because you know what people aren't going to do? Go to the movies, pay $15 to $20 for a movie ticket when they can watch a movie at home.
$15 to $20 per person, John. That's the biggest one. $15 per person. That's the craziest part, when you can just watch it on Disney Plus and pay $10 a month. And we'll have to interrupt quickly because Bruce Peralt, who hopefully I said that right, is in the chat saying, "Hey Phil, Bruce, your time's coming. I swear. Survivor Talk starts in like a month. I promise. Probably less. Alexa and I will be back. I'm stoked. I can't wait for Bruce to be back on the TV. The shining star of the finale party up there in New York. Just had to throw that in. I know he's probably tuning in like, oh yeah, they're talking about me, and instead of we're talking about Disney and the disaster that Disney has been. But it's coming, Bruce. I promise. But yeah, the whole thing with the decision making is just bad. Like that's really what it comes down to. The decision making has just been bad, and I feel like everybody who's in control of the decision making has been bad. And I think it's just from top to bottom. When I look at this, like, so here's the movies that they've released this year: Quantumania, which was one of the worst performing Marvel movies ever, right? Like at box office, I'm pretty sure. Then they did. What is this? Chang Can Dunk, which was a Disney Plus movie. Peter Pan and Wendy, which was a Disney Plus movie. So those are two movies they can't make money on. And I know people say, oh, well, they can get subscribers to their streaming service. No. You're not making money on those because they're not people aren't paying to watch those. They might pay to come to your streaming service, but you're not going to make back. Let's say that was a $10 million budget even. You're not making $10 million on those movies.
Yeah, and look who's attached as the director of Peter Pan and Wendy.
Who is it?
It's David Lowery.
Yeah, which is crazy, man.
David Lowery, who made a successful Disney movie in Peace Dragon, made A Ghost Story, which, I mean, we all know I love that movie. And like The Green Knight, which was one of the most like awesome movies that came out. Was that 2 years ago now? But like that was a great movie too. Like this is a good director made this movie that no one saw.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody saw it. And it's a Disney Plus release for one of the most iconic of the Disney stories, right? I mean, Peter Pan, if you go to Disney World or Disneyland, that has the longest line out of any of the rides because the ship flies, and that's what every kid wants to do. It's funny.
Yep.
Like and then so then we're moving on, right? And then we go to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which was successful. The Little Mermaid, which I understand that The Little Mermaid got stuck in the middle of a political war. It got stuck in the middle of a culture war. The right wing in America was saying that this movie was just trying to be woke and that's why it's failed. And then the left wing in America was trying to say, no, it was fine. It did fine. This movie did not make them the money it needed to make them. It was so here's what it was. It was a $250 million budget. They admit they put $250 million more into the P&A. So this is a $500 million budget movie that made $564 million. That is not the return on investment that Disney needs to make. You're talking about major producers not getting paid out money for this movie because it didn't, in the waterfall, it didn't make enough money. So it's not a disaster, but it's not a success. It's literally just a movie that they probably shouldn't have made that didn't make them enough. And the reviews weren't good on it. Elemental comes out, made a lot more overseas than it's made in America. In America, it was bad, but it's like a $200 million budget, and they don't promote it. I think it's already on Disney Plus, if I'm not mistaken. I don't actually know, but that's a Pixar movie with terrible reviews, which is crazy because that never used to happen. Then they turn around and make Indiana Jones, which is reported to have a $300 million budget, and worldwide, that movie made $368 million. And that's not counting, again, the P&A. So this is only part of it. And then they come out with this movie, Haunted Mansion, $157 million budget. And so far it's made $59 million. I don't know what the problem is, but I also know that none of those movies I just named, none of them are people saying, you got to watch this movie. It's so good. You got to sit down and watch it. So it's not just, they can't just say, oh, it's the political environment. They can't say it's just, because of layoffs or whatever's been going on and money's down or something. They can't blame it on anything else. It's not the actors. It's not the directors. It's none of that. They're making a bad product all the time. And Haunted Mansion was just such a bland, boring product for what a lot of people would consider to be one of their favorite childhood memories. That's crazy to me.
That's the interesting thing about this movie, because the interesting thing with Haunted Mansion is there's already a story there, right? And they use that story in the movie. But it's just presented in a way where it's not exciting. The fact that we don't see ghosts for like the majority of this movie, weird.
Very.
Like, very weird. It's just like, there's this invisible ghost. The fact that they they've assembled this very strong comedic cast. And now we get into the spoilers of this movie. The fact that Owen Wilson's character is this complete fraud who's just why is that not explored more? He's not actually a priest. He's just, being a con artist here. Why isn't that explored more? Why isn't Danny DeVito's character just have more to do? Because Danny DeVito, by far, is the best part of this movie.
Yeah.
And even then, watching it, he still kind of reads just like a less obscene Frank Reynolds.
He seems like a less obscene Frank Reynolds. The Owen Wilson character seems like a less whatever his name is from Royal Tenenbaums. They all feel like Tiffany Haddish. It feels like they were we'll just throw Tiffany Haddish in a cool hat or whatever those things. I don't know what it's called, but we're just gonna make her a medium. Okay, I don't feel like it ever got to the level of zaniness or interest. The Jungle Cruise movie, I didn't find to be that good, but the Jungle Cruise movie entertained me a lot until they decided that they were gonna have at the end some curse, and that's why everybody is the way they are. Disney loved the curse thing ever since The Curse of the Black Pearl because that movie was a massive hit for them. But and what makes me laugh with Haunted Mansion, right? Being somebody who follows Disney stuff closely because I do love Disney so much, I'm seeing both the right wing and the left wing beliefs on these movies. And this movie, when you go into this is not, there's nothing in this movie that feels like it's 2023. You know what I mean? There's nothing in this movie where you're like, oh, they're preaching to their audience or they're trying to make some sort of political statement or anything. There's nothing in this movie that's like that, which I think is refreshing in some ways, because I feel like Disney for a period might have been trying to hammer that home too much and started to feel insincere. This movie's not doing any of that, and yet it still didn't feel like it was being authentic. Does that make sense? Like, it's so weird how, like, it didn't feel like they were trying to make a statement. It didn't feel like they were trying to do something that they've been doing, you know, pretty much like some of their movies. It just feels like they have like their one-off line or something where like, what are you talking about? But this movie didn't feel like it was doing any of that. And it did not have an authenticity to it at all, which is crazy, because Haunted Mansion is like one of the most authentic attractions there is.
Yeah, it feels like they didn't know what type of movie they wanted to make. That was my impression of it the entire time. It's like, are you making this a children's horror movie, which we know Disney can do? They've done it previously. They are capable of doing that. Are you making it like a family, like scary comedy? If that's the case, we also know you can do that type of thing, right? They were even successful like last year with a movie like that with whatchamacallit, that sequel they made and released on Disney Plus, Hocus Pocus.
Yeah, Hocus Pocus was solid. Yeah,
right? Like they can do this. They have people that they work with who can make a movie like this. Like, it just felt like the writer of this movie needed to watch like 3 episodes of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah,
and it would have been better.
Exactly. And it felt like it was trying to take its time, which I was fine with, and I thought that was good. And then it just started being like, okay, what are you doing? Like, what's the next thing that's going to happen? When is this going to be fun? And like, even down to the first thing with like Lakeith Stanfield, where he goes in and then he leaves the house and then the ship guy follows him home. And like, all of that is just overblown CGI, whatever. It wasn't even like a fun discovery of that stuff happening to him, right? Like, it kept changing to
Deadliest Catch. Hilarious.
Which was very funny. But give me more of that stuff. Have him like throw a mac and cheese into the microwave and he pulls it out and it's a lobster. Like have stuff like it didn't get zany enough. It didn't get crazy enough. It didn't get fun enough. And I thought I was going to go into this movie and it was going to be like overly fun, to the point where I was like, okay, like almost like a Van Helsing or I can't think of the name of the other one, but like a Van Helsing, where like the whole movie is just total nonsense. But you could tell like they're making a movie that's meant to be overly CGI and just like a goofy, ridiculous movie. It's not good. I own it. I'm not ashamed to admit it. But this movie didn't go there. Like, if it would have went there, like it was too much CGI, but the CGI wasn't making things more fun. It was just kind of like there because it was almost like they needed a crutch.
It almost felt too illogical the way the CGI worked too, right? Like in that scene where the captain goes home with him, all of a sudden he opens the door and it's the ocean. It's like, that makes no sense based on everything we know. And the other problem is like, none of these ghosts have character.
Yeah.
Right? Like none of them are established. And like, we're introducing this very distinct charactered ghost. He's a sea captain. And never speaks. None of the ghosts speak. None of the ghosts interact. Like, we don't even see this character. We never see this actual character. Yeah. And like, we don't get anything. And there should be that type of like playing back and forth, right? And that's where the trailer really made it seem like that, because it essentially just had all the funny moments from the movie in the trailer.
Yeah. No, it did. It really did. It made it seem like it was going to be more playful, and then it wasn't. Like, there's no reason that Haunted Mansion, there's really no reason that every time Disney makes a movie, it shouldn't be at least a 3-star movie. There's no reason.
Yeah.
There's no reason. They have the simplest formula in the world, right? Of like, somebody down on their luck finds an opportunity and they're faced with wackiness, and then they solve the problem, save the day, and they help the child and single mother along the way, or whoever it's going to be, right? Like, whatever that version is. And Haunted Mansion, that's what it was. And they just dropped it on its head.
Especially when they like you said, the setup for this movie is so good. We open up with this scene with Lakeith Stanfield's character meeting a woman. He's a astrophysicist. She's a ghost tour guide. So like, can't be further apart. And then we cut, and all of a sudden the next thing we see is that he is a ghost tour guide. I was like, okay, what's going on here? I want to know more. And then eventually get to this point where, yeah, she's dead. And it's like, oh, that's dark. But like the movie doesn't embrace how dark that is and how big of an accomplishment it is for him to open up. And like, I'm not one for advocating for shoehorn romances. This movie needed the Lakeith Stanfield Rosario Dawson romance so badly.
And what drove me nuts about this movie is I felt like at the end they wanted us to believe that they had a romance.
Yeah.
And there was nothing to tell us that in the movie, except that one is a man and one is a woman, and like he's making friends with her child.
Son.
Like that's
like
literally
kind of acting like a father figure. Who we also find out his father's dead at the end of the movie. And it's like, oh, that's a big deal, but it doesn't feel like it's as big of a deal as it should be.
Exactly. I totally agree. Yeah, it was frustrating because, like, again, this wasn't a movie that I hated.
Yeah.
This wasn't a movie where I sat there and I was like, oh my God, this is so bad. I just was like, when is something fun going to happen?
Yeah.
Like there was nothing overtly terrible about it, except for the product placement was ridiculous. But like, it was fine. It was just, and then it just stayed boring the entire time. Like there were no ups and downs. And like I feel like they tried to do too many winks and nods at the ride, but without ever explaining why it was involved in this movie, other than the 999 ghosts and they need 1,000. Okay, got it. Fine. But they don't do it with anything else.
But you know what? It would have been fun. They don't even really like capitalize on this 999 ghost aspect of it. How cool would it be if throughout the run of this movie, you're in the mansion and you can count all 999 ghosts?
Yeah.
Right? Like think of like a Haunting on Hill House, right? Where every single scene has a ghost. Sorry if anyone who didn't know that, but every single scene in that show has a ghost. And if you look carefully enough, you can find them. How awesome would this movie be if you're just seeing a ghost in the background of every single scene?
Yeah.
And it's a different ghost. And then like at the end, you can count all 999. And let me tell you, some of these ghosts that appear at the end make absolutely no sense for the story they give.
I know. Because it's all supposed to be like, well, they were all killed at this party, and it's like, okay, really, all of those were really?
Yeah,
I know.
Like this mummy, or this like very Asian woman, or like none of it. Like it's just like a bunch of stereotypical, like mildly offensive ghosts.
Yeah, I know, and like it should have just been like, hey, like this was a mansion where these people died over time or whatever. Like I always think. Like American Horror Story. Like obviously that's an actual horror. It's not meant to be comedic at all, but like they really get into the backstories in those of like what sets up this house to be haunted or like who died in this house or whatever it was. They just like, they threw it in so shoehorned. It was like, it didn't feel like a powerful reveal because it just felt like it was shoehorned in.
Well, and it feels like there are like these little setup pieces in the movie that could have really paid off. Like the fact that there's a point in the movie where they mentioned the house just appeared. No records of it ever being built. It was just there. Yeah. How cool would it, like, easiest throwaway line ever to explain every single one of these ghosts and why they're all from like different historical moments is by saying this house like travels to different places in the world and people die in it. And that's how this guy's collecting souls.
And the only reason they wanted the second house, do you know why?
Why?
Because that was the exterior for the Disney World one. So the first house was, the first house was the exterior for the Disneyland, and then the second house was the exterior for the Disney World. My wife figured that out.
I've never been to Disney World, so I didn't know that.
So that's what it was. So like they literally were just trying to do so many nods to their attractions and stuff like that. But it's like, okay.
I did think like the nod to like the opening room on the ride was good though. Like when they have like the sunken room. The stretching room, like it was a great scene. And it still fell flat because it's like, why are there alligators here?
Why are there why are they so bad CGI? Like this whole week I've been rewatching the Planet of the Apes movies, and I watched the first two of the newer series, and the CGI is incredible in that. You're gonna tell me Disney figured out how to make incredible CGI for those alligators? Those alligators looked like they were straight out of a 1999 video game for PS1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just came across that no one cared. And like, I think the most frustrating thing about this movie is it, again, has so much potential. Like, the story's good and established, right? It's established. Most people know the story of the Haunted Mansion. Like you said,
Mhm.
it is one of the prime attractions in the Disney parks. And you still fall flat. Like, I just don't understand, like, how you didn't care enough to make this bigger. Because if this movie's a success, it drives people to your parks.
Well, it drives people to your parks, and also it produces a sequel. You can have
Yeah.
more stuff. You can have more stuff going on with that. Like, you have so much potential. And not only that, you should always want to make money when you're making movies. Like, that's the point,
Yes.
right? Like I hate to be like, yeah, okay, there's an art to it, blah, blah, blah. Disney's not worried about the art when they're making the Haunted Mansion movie. The point is to make
No.
money. And when you are built on making money and you fail by like over $100 million, something is very wrong with your company. Something is very, very wrong with your company right now. And I just hope they can solve it, because I love going to Disney World. I love it. And I used to live an exit away from Disneyland when I was in California
Mhm.
for a period of time. Like, I want these things to stay alive and do well.
Yeah.
But if the tent poles aren't succeeding, man, this company is just flushing money down the toilet. And not to, like, this is real life stuff, but like,
Yeah.
their stock price is lower than it was in 2014.
Yeah.
So if you've held Disney stock for 9 years, you've lost money? That should not be the case for something that owns everything.
Yeah. It's one of those things where it's funny how you mentioned, like, the movie making of it is to make money, right? And like, it's not the art. A company like Disney needs the money, like the money bringers, so they can make the art,
Yeah.
right? Like, and like Disney's not making like A24 films or anything like that.
Yeah.
But like, in order for Disney to like sit down and spend like 5 years making their next like animated masterpiece, they need to be bringing in money with movies like this. And if they're making movies like this, all they are doing is sowing customer disbelief. Like, I don't think anyone can be like, yeah, that's a Disney movie, I need to go see it. There was a time not too long ago where the name Disney brought people to movie theaters.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is long gone now. Like, that
Mhm.
really is long gone. People are no longer saying, I need to go see this movie because it's a Disney movie. It's just not there right now. And they need to figure it out, because it sucks when, like, you see it, and every time now it's almost become, how are they going to mess this up? What are they going
Yeah.
to do that's going to make this not good? What, like, you're almost expecting them to fail. And Disney should not be failing all that often. And I don't know if it's just they don't know what they want to do. I don't know if they really saw an opportunity in 2020 because of COVID and with like their streaming and stuff, and they really thought that was going to succeed longer. But also, you would think that you would realize that the world was going to kind of go back to normal at some point, and you weren't going to be able to live off the streaming money forever. I don't know what it is. I have no
It's
idea, but it's a problem.
we've talked about it a few times where, like, you and I personally, about how Disney making their own streaming service was almost the worst possible
Mhm.
decision they could have made. And
Yeah.
it's not because like they've done these home releases, which were also a bad idea. Like, it made sense during COVID. They shouldn't have charged for it. Maybe left a better taste in people's mouths. And again, just added to people like not really trusting the company.
Uh-huh.
But Disney makes a lot more money selling the rights to these movies to Netflix, to Amazon,
Mhm.
things like that, and like just rotating through them. It makes them a ton more money. Disney, as people who really enjoy movies, Disney is the company that can make or break physical media.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, maybe listeners, you don't remember these times, but Disney used to have this thing called the Vault, where
Yeah.
they would only release movies every 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
And like, you couldn't physically purchase the movie unless it was one of these releases.
And it was hurry up and get it before the vault closes on this one. It was all
Yeah.
the time.
And like, you did. I have so many Disney movies because of the fear of the vault.
Yeah.
And
Now I
it
need to
doesn't
start
matter.
buying Disney movies over fear that they're going to cut scenes from movies.
Yeah.
Like, I need to make sure I have the original versions of these movies.
Yeah, exactly. Like, but like, it's a company that can succeed. The name alone should equal success. Again, like, we look back at something like Frozen. Let's look at Frozen for a second.
Yeah.
I accidentally saw Frozen on opening night.
Mhm.
It was date night. I was like, this new Disney movie just came out. Let's go see it. Didn't realize it was opening night. Terrible night to go see a new Disney movie.
Mhm.
But like, it was the name Disney was enough to drive me in. I knew nothing about the movie.
Mhm.
Just it being a Disney movie felt like an appropriate thing to do for a date night.
Yeah.
Right. And since Disney spread themselves so thin with the acquisition of Marvel, with the acquisition of Star Wars, they're just not paying attention to this. And like, they've realized it. I mean, again, Bob Iger quotes. Bob Iger said, "We're making too many Marvel movies. We're making too many Marvel TV shows. We're making way too much Star Wars, and we need to dial it all back." Like, they're starting to vocalize these mistakes, but is it too late? Is the question.
Yeah, and that is the big question. And I mean, I live down here in Florida now, so like I'm only 2 hours away from the parks and stuff. But I do think also, like, look, like, best intentions, right? And all that fun stuff. But I do think the way that Disney handled a lot under Bob Chapek, which was before Iger, and a lot of like their decisions to get involved or not involved in political things, I think that hurt them. Because at the end of the day, every state around Florida, and Florida's now, everybody talks about it's like now a deep red state. Well, people just like moved here. So it's like, it's not, I don't think it's as deep red as people think, but Alabama's deep red and Mississippi's deep red and Tennessee's deep red. And those are the states where a lot of people are coming from to go to Disney World. And I do think that Disney made some questionable decisions because they didn't get involved quick enough to appease the left-wing part of the country. And then when they did get involved, they started to do things that did not appease the right-wing part of the country. And I get, like, you could say one side's right and one side's wrong. I understand that. But when you're a mega conglomerate like Disney is, and the only way you can make money is to be the place for everyone, in air quotes, I think they made some bad decisions along the way, and they weren't strong enough decisions. And I think they've almost made their brand poison to both sides of this argument at this point. I think they've made at least to parts of it, factions of it, not everybody, but I think they've made themselves poison to different parts of this where they have lost customers on both sides of the political spectrum that are never going to come back. And I do think that there needs to be something said for that. I think that is a serious issue Disney has. Whether they should have gotten involved in the political thing or not, I don't know, but they should have done it differently than the way Bob Chapek handled it, which was, I'm not going to say anything because we don't get involved in politics, gets a little pushback, and then starts to speak like so openly about it. And now they're in the middle of a lawsuit with the governor of a state. I get like the whole FU mentality of it, but that's not benefiting Disney right now.
No.
It's not benefiting them. And I think that's the problem.
And as much as it's like nice to see companies have morals and things like that, it doesn't count if they're doing it because they feel it'll improve their stock, right? Like, there has to be sincerity behind it, and none of these actions Disney has made have felt sincere. It has always been in response to pushback from the community, and if that's the case, like, you have the wrong people in charge.
Yeah, exactly.
And like, that's just what it comes down to. They're pushing like diversity in films and stuff. A lot of that has to do with like Academy rules for films that are nominated. A lot of that has to do just for like, to make it seem like they're being inclusive and things like that. But if they don't have that same representation at the top of the organization, it's not really representation. Yeah. Right. And like Disney has made so many mistakes getting into this political field. Arguably, a couple of years ago, you could have said Disney World ran Florida. Yeah. And it doesn't feel that way anymore.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And we'll see what ends up happening. I mean, the problem is, so like right now for Disney, they have problems everywhere, whether it be the parks, whether it be their movies, whether it be their streaming service. They have problems everywhere. And a movie like Haunted Mansion, I feel like just really draws attention to the problems they have, where on its second weekend, it's the 5th highest grossing movie of that weekend, and it only made $9 million. Yeah. And it lost out to Barbie, which made $53 million in its third weekend, and Oppenheimer, which made $28 million in its third weekend, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which made $28 million in its first weekend, and The Meg, which made its $28 million in the first weekend. You can't blame this on an overcrowding or something. Barbie and Oppenheimer have the legs. A movie like Haunted Mansion that is so recognizable should have the legs. But I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. But I'm excited.
I think
we talked about it.
Yeah, me too. I think Disney just has to take a step back And like they have to not be pushing out content like crazy.
Mhm.
They need to go back to, I think maybe some of the issue is, you remember how Disney used to have the like straight to VHS movies,
Yeah.
right? Like the Disney sequels and stuff that were the like the final projects of the animation studio grads and stuff like that. That's what Disney Plus should be.
Yeah. Instead,
right?
they're putting
Disney,
way too much money into the Disney Plus movies, and they're not getting a return on it.
Exactly. Disney Plus should be, this is the people we are training to make our movies. And then you have your filmmakers, like you're the people who are established making these big movies and making spectacle. Go back to the basics. That's what Disney needs to do. If Disney, like, again, if we look at those successful ones, Moana, Frozen, these type of movies, they follow the classic Disney formula.
Yeah.
We are...
Encanto does the same, even though I think Encanto falls short in the end. It does follow that formula.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We're like 7, 8 years removed from those movies now. Disney needs another renaissance.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're at a point where Disney needs to sit down and just figure out what they're doing. Right now, they are focusing so much on reimagining their own IPs rather than rediscovering new IPs.
Yep, exactly. And there's plenty of stuff to pull from, because something like Frozen, which is being pulled from the Ice Queen, and then you have Moana, which I don't even know if Moana was pulled for something or totally original, whatever.
Myth, but
yeah, just whatever. It's like that's where you need to be going again. We don't need live action remakes. That some of them will make you money, some aren't, but I think people are getting tired of it. And I think that's what Disney has done overall, is I think people have just gotten tired of feeling like they're watching the same thing over and over again. And it's a lot. And I think that that's hurt them. But at the end of the day, we both went and saw Haunted Mansion. We're going to be two of the only people in the world who saw it. And people are going to be like, why'd you see it? We're going to be like, because we have a podcast. And they're going to be like, well, I'm not going to listen to that because you talked about Haunted Mansion. So that's that, you know? Catch 22 here, John.
It's okay. We really like the fact that you guys are listening to us despite us talking about Haunted Mansion.
I know. I appreciate it. Iron Man 2 and Haunted Mansion is not exactly the one that's going to bring in all the people, I don't think. But I hope
maybe next week will, though.
Next week will, yeah. So next week, hopefully, we'll see. I'm very curious, actually, how the movie we're going to do next week is going to do box office wise. But next week we are talking Thor, because that's the next MCU movie, and then we're doing the last voyage of the Demeter, which is a haunted, a horror movie about the Dracula boat that came over. I'm very excited for that movie. I hope it's good.
Yeah,
I really
it looks really interesting, and then, like, you and I both love isolation horror, so it should be really fun to see how it's done. The cast has a bunch of like these, because the cast is like Liam Cunningham and John Washington, right?
Is it? I don't know. I actually have no idea. I just know it's
okay.
Liam Cunningham.
But like
Corey Hawkins, Liam Cunningham, and David Dastmalchian, who you've definitely seen. Once you see him, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, that guy.
But like, is this fun? Like, is these fun smaller character actors who are now in this movie? It should be a lot of fun to watch. I'm excited for it. Thor, I love Kenneth Branagh, so I'm really excited for like a Shakespearean Marvel movie.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are we? I forget what we ended up saying. So then we're doing that next week, and then I think that's it, right? And then we're off,
and then we take a week off.
28th.
That's right.
Okay, got it. All right, so yeah, Last Voyage of the Demeter and Thor. So tune in next week. It'll be hopefully a more positive. I don't know anything about Last Voyage, if it's actually
we'll see
if it's actually doing well or not. So we'll talk next week, though. Bye.